Welcome back to the channel, friends, where everyday objects hide extraordinary stories and where a simple coin in your pocket could quietly hold the power to change a life. And today we are diving deep into one of the most mysterious, controversial, and emotionally charged topics in modern American numismatics, the 1971 no-mint Mark 1-cent USA coin. A penny that most people have spent without a second thought, dropped into jars, lost under couch cushions, or tossed into parking lots, yet, under very specific circumstances and surrounded by rare errors, minting mistakes, and extraordinary possibilities, this humble copper coin has been whispered about in collector circles as being worth up to $27 million, a number so shocking that it forces even experienced collectors to pause and ask how could something so small, so common, so overlooked possibly reach such a staggering value. And that question is exactly why this story matters, because it is not just about money, it is about history, chance, human error, and the thin line between ordinary and extraordinary that defines so many great treasure stories. And as we explore this penny in depth, you will begin to understand how the year 1971 sits at a fascinating crossroads in United States coinage history, a time when the mint was under pressure to produce massive quantities of coins for a growing economy. When materials, machinery, and human oversight collided in unpredictable ways, and when a handful of mistakes may have escaped into circulation unnoticed, setting the stage for one of the most valuable 1-cent coins ever discussed, even debated, in the numismatic world. And to understand the 1971 no-mint Mark penny, we must first step back and remember that pennies minted in Philadelphia traditionally carried no mint mark, meaning millions upon millions of coins left the Philadelphia Mint bearing only the familiar Lincoln portrait on the obverse and the Lincoln Memorial on the reverse, making the phrase no mint mark itself seem ordinary, almost meaningless. Yet within that sea of normal coins, a tiny number may exhibit characteristics so rare and so dramatic that they transform the coin from pocket change into legend. And one of the key reasons collectors believe a 1971 penny could reach a value as high as $27 million lies in the possibility of extreme mint errors combined with unique transitional anomalies that may have occurred during this period. Because 1971 was a year of adjustment, experimentation, and intense production demands, and under such conditions, mistakes were not just possible, they were inevitable. And the real question is which mistakes escaped quality control and how severe they were, because in numismatics, rarity is not simply about age. It is about how few examples exist and how dramatic the deviation is from the standard issue. And when we talk about a penny valued in the tens of millions, we are not talking about a lightly worn coin or a minor off-center strike. We are talking about errors so profound that they challenge what we believe is possible within the minting process itself, such as wrong planchet errors, double denomination strikes, transitional metal compositions, dramatic doubled dies, and catastrophic die failures that create one-of-a-kind or nearly one-of-a-kind specimens. And the 1971 penny sits in a perfect storm of such possibilities, because while the official composition for Lincoln cents in 1971 was primarily copper with a small percentage of zinc, the U.S. Mint was already feeling pressure from rising copper prices, experimenting with different alloys, and preparing for future changes. And in such an environment, the possibility that a small number of cents were struck on experimental, foreign, or incorrect planchets cannot be dismissed. And if a 1971 penny were struck on a planchet intended for another denomination, or even another country, especially if that planchet were made of a significantly different metal such as aluminum, bronze of a different composition, or even a silver-based alloy, the coin would instantly become one of the rarest errors known, and collectors would fight fiercely for the right to own it, driving its value into the stratosphere, especially if it were unique, because uniqueness is the ultimate driver of value in high-end numismatics, and beyond wrong planchets. There is the tantalizing possibility of transitional errors, which occur when leftover planchets or dies from one production period are accidentally used during another, and while the most famous transitional errors involve years like 1943 and 1944 with steel and copper cents, the early 1970s also present intriguing transitional questions, because the mint was quietly testing alternatives behind the scenes. And if even a single 1971 penny were struck on a non-standard experimental planchet that was never meant to leave the mint, its existence would represent a leak in history, a physical artifact proving that experimentation reached the public unintentionally. And such a coin would not just be valuable, it would be priceless to historians, museums, and elite collectors alike. And this is where the $27 million valuation begins to feel less like fantasy and more like a theoretical ceiling based on what collectors have paid for other unique U.S. coinage errors. Because history shows us that when a coin is truly unique, with ironclad authentication and a compelling backstory, money becomes almost irrelevant to the world's top collectors, and they will pay whatever it takes to secure that piece. And another major factor that could elevate a 1971 no-mint mark penny into this ultra-rare category is an extreme double-die error, far beyond the typical machine doubling seen on many coins. Because true double dies occur when the die itself is misaligned during the hubbing process, creating a doubling that is sharp, raised, and unmistakable. And while minor double dies are collected and valued, an extreme double die affecting the date, the word Liberty, Indiana God We Trust, or even the Lincoln portrait itself in a dramatic way could create a coin of legendary status, especially if only one or two examples are known. And in the early 1970s, quality control was not what many imagine it to be today. As the mint was racing to meet demand, often pushing dies far beyond their optimal lifespan, increasing the risk of misalignment, cracking, and catastrophic failure. And this brings us to another fascinating possibility: the cracked die, shattered die, or retained cut error, where a portion of the die breaks away and remains in place long enough to strike coins with massive raised blobs of metal, missing design elements, or surreal distortions that make the coin look almost melted. And while many cracked die coins exist, a truly extreme example combined with other errors, such as misalignment or wrong planchet, could create a perfect storm of rarity. And when multiple major errors occur on a single coin, collectors refer to it as a multiple error coin, and these are exponentially rarer than single error pieces, because each error has to occur in sequence without the coin being rejected, and the odds of that happening are astronomical, which is why when such coins surface, they become instant stars of major auctions. And another element that cannot be ignored in the discussion of a $27 million penny is condition, because even the rarest error loses significant value if it is heavily worn, damaged, or altered after leaving the mint. And for a coin to reach a valuation in the tens of millions, it would likely need to be in near-perfect condition, possibly graded MS-67 or higher by a top grading service, with full original luster, sharp details, and no post-mint damage. And the idea that such a coin could survive decades in circulation without being discovered, cleaned, or damaged may seem unlikely, but history has shown us time and again that extraordinary coins can remain hidden in plain sight for generations, passed down in jars, drawers, and collections where their true nature was never recognized. And sometimes it is precisely because a coin looks ordinary at first glance that it escapes scrutiny, especially when the error is subtle or requires specialized knowledge or equipment to identify. And this leads us to the human element of the story. Because coins do not exist in a vacuum, they pass through hands, through lives, through moments of inattention and necessity. And the 1971 penny would have entered a world undergoing enormous change, a world of inflation, social upheaval, and economic uncertainty, where few people had the luxury of examining their change closely. And fewer still imagined that a penny from their pocket could one day be worth more than mansions, supercars, or private islands. And as the years passed, countless 1971 pennies were spent, lost, and destroyed, reducing the pool of survivors. And if among them there was a tiny subset of error coins, their survival rate would be even lower, making any example that emerges today all the more valuable. And the valuation of $27 million is not pulled from thin air, but rather from comparisons to other legendary U.S. coins that have sold for staggering sums, such as the 1933 St. Gaudens Double Eagle, the 1794 Flowing Hair Dollar, and unique era coins that combine rarity, condition, and historical significance. And while those coins are larger denominations, the psychological impact of a penny being worth more than gold coins adds an extra layer of fascination that drives collector interest even higher. Because it challenges our assumptions about value and forces us to reconsider what we overlook in everyday life. And beyond wrong planchets, doubled dies, and die failures, there is also the possibility of off-metal strikes involving foreign planchets, which occur when blank discs intended for other countries' coins are accidentally fed into U.S. presses, and during the 1970s, the U.S. Mint produced coins for many foreign governments, increasing the risk of such mix-ups, and if a 1971 penny were struck on a foreign planchet made of an unusual metal or size, the resulting coin would immediately stand out to experts, and if authenticated, could become a unique bridge between U.S. and world coinage history, further enhancing its desirability and value. And there is also the intriguing possibility of meal errors, where two mismatched dies are paired together, such as an obverse from one denomination and a reverse from another, creating a coin that should not exist at all. And while mules are extremely rare, they have occurred in U.S. coinage. And a 1971 penny mule would instantly become one of the most important modern-era coins ever discovered. And when you combine all these possibilities, wrong planchets, transitional metals, doubled dies, cracked dies, multiple errors, mule pairings, and pristine condition, the theoretical maximum value of a 1971 no-mint mark penny begins to make sense, because the market does not price coins solely on what exists today, but on what could exist and how fiercely collectors would compete if it did, and in the high end of numismatics. Prices are driven by emotion as much as logic, by the desire to own something no one else can, and by the prestige that comes with holding a piece of history that defies expectations. And it is important to understand that not every 1971 penny is valuable, and the vast majority are worth only face value or slightly more. But the story here is about possibility, about the idea that among the billions of ordinary objects around us, there may be a handful of extraordinary ones waiting to be recognized, and that idea resonates deeply with people because it offers hope, curiosity, and a sense of adventure. And that is why stories like this captivate audiences, because they remind us that value is not always obvious, that mistakes can become treasures, and that history often hides in the smallest details. And as collectors continue to search, examine, and authenticate coins from this era, the legend of the 1971 no-mint mark penny continues to grow, fueled by auction records, expert analysis, and the occasional rumor of a newly discovered specimen that pushes the boundaries of what we thought was possible. And whether or not a $27 million example ever publicly surfaces, the very discussion of such a valuation changes how people look at their change, inspiring new generations of collectors to learn, observe, and question. And in that sense, the true value of this penny may not be measured solely in dollars, but in the curiosity and passion it ignites. Because every time someone picks up a coin and looks a little closer, wondering if they are holding something special, the spirit of numismatics lives on, connecting us to history, to human error, and to the extraordinary potential hidden within the ordinary. And that is the real story of the 1971 no-mint mark 1 cent USA coin, a story not just of metal and money, but of chance, mystery, and the enduring belief that even the smallest things can hold unimaginable worth. Next, 1980 mint mark D 1 cent USA coin, a penny that millions of people have handled, spent, ignored, and forgotten, yet under very rare circumstances and because of a combination of unusual errors, minting mistakes, transitional possibilities, and historical pressure at the United States Mint, this seemingly common Denver minted penny has been rumored, theorized, and passionately debated as having the potential to reach a staggering value of $19 million, a figure so shocking that it instantly forces the question of how a coin produced in massive numbers during the modern era could possibly be worth more than luxury homes, priceless artwork, or even some rare gold coins. And the answer lies not in what the coin was meant to be, but in what could have gone wrong during its creation, because the year 1980 represents a critical and often misunderstood moment in the history of the Lincoln cent. A moment when rising metal prices, changing economic realities, overworked machinery, and human oversight converged in ways that created fertile ground for extraordinary errors. And to truly understand why a 1980 penny could theoretically command a $19 million valuation, we must first understand the environment in which it was born. Because the Denver Mint in 1980 was under intense pressure to strike enormous quantities of cents to meet public demand at a time when inflation was high, copper prices were volatile, and the cost of producing a 1-cent coin was becoming dangerously close to exceeding its face value, and this pressure pushed the mint to its limits, often stretching dies beyond their intended lifespan, increasing the risk of misalignment, die cracks, die clashes, and catastrophic failures, while also increasing the likelihood that wrong planchets, experimental materials, or leftover blanks from other denominations or foreign contracts could find their way into the presses unnoticed. And it is within this chaotic and demanding environment that the seeds of ultra-rare errors were planted, because when speed and volume take priority, perfection becomes harder to maintain, and the 1980 penny sits right at the edge of one of the most important transitions in modern U.S. coinage, since just 2 years later, in 1982, the composition of the Lincoln cent would officially change from mostly copper to copper-plated zinc. Meaning that in 1980, the mint was already deeply aware that the days of the traditional copper cent were numbered, and behind the scenes, discussions, testing, and experimentation were already taking place. And while official records may not publicly document every experimental planchet or test strike, history has repeatedly shown that experimental coins sometimes escape into circulation, intentionally or not. And if even a single 1980 penny were struck on an experimental planchet of an unusual metal, such as aluminum, an alternative bronze alloy, or another non-standard composition, that coin would instantly become one of the most important modern era cents ever discovered because it would represent physical proof of experimentation leaking into public hands, and collectors value such evidence enormously, especially when it is tied to a major transition in minting history, and this alone could justify a valuation reaching into the tens of millions if the coin were unique, fully authenticated, and preserved in high mint state condition, and beyond experimental metals. One of the most compelling and realistic era possibilities associated with a $19,001,980 penny is a wrong planchet error, where the coin is struck on a blank intended for another denomination or even another country, and during this period, the U.S. Mint was producing not only domestic coinage but also coins for foreign governments, increasing the likelihood of planchet mix-ups. And if a Lincoln cent design were struck on a planchet intended for a dime, a foreign coin, or a token of a different metal and thickness, the result would be a coin that immediately defies expectations in weight, color, size, and sound, and such coins are among the most coveted errors in numismatics, especially when the metal involved is significantly more valuable or unusual than copper, and if that wrong planchet were itself rare or experimental, the value of the resulting penny would multiply dramatically. And another major factor that could push a 1980 penny into legendary territory is the presence of an extreme double die error, not the flat, shelf-like machine doubling that is relatively common, but a true hub doubled die where the die received two misaligned impressions during its creation, resulting in bold, raised, clearly separated doubling on the date, lettering, or Lincoln's portrait. And while many doubled dies exist, only a handful are dramatic enough to become famous. And if a 1980 double die cent were discovered with doubling so strong that it visibly altered the appearance of the coin even to the naked eye, especially if it affected multiple design elements simultaneously, it could instantly become the key variety of the year. And if only one or two examples were known, collectors would compete fiercely for ownership, pushing the price far beyond what most people would consider reasonable for a penny. And this competition is fueled not just by rarity but by storytelling. Because collectors love coins with a clear, dramatic narrative, and a penny that visually shows the consequences of a major minting error tells that story instantly. And then there are die cracks, retained cuds, and shattered dies, errors that occur when a die is pushed far beyond its safe operational limits, causing pieces of it to crack or break away, and in some cases, a broken piece of the die remains in place long enough to strike coins with massive raised blobs of metal, missing details, or surreal distortions that make the coin look almost sculptural, and while minor die cracks are common, truly extreme examples are rare, and when combined with other errors, such as off-center strikes or wrong planchets, they become exponentially rarer. And this brings us to the concept of multiple error coins, which are among the most valuable and sought-after items in all of numismatics. Because the odds of multiple independent errors occurring on the same coin without it being rejected by quality control are incredibly small, and if a 1980 penny were discovered, exhibiting a combination of a wrong planchet, a doubled die, and a retained cut or major die break, the coin would likely be unique, and uniqueness is the ultimate driver of value at the highest levels of collecting, because when there is only one known example, price becomes a matter of negotiation rather than comparison, and this is where valuations like $19 million become theoretically possible. Because at that level, the buyer is not just purchasing a coin, but a piece of history that no one else can own, and condition plays an equally critical role in this discussion, because for a coin to reach such an extreme valuation, it would need to be preserved in exceptional condition, ideally mint state with minimal or no post-mint damage, full original luster, sharp details, and strong eye appeal, and while it may seem unlikely that such a rare error could survive decades without being damaged, history proves that it is possible, especially if the coin was discovered early and set aside by someone who sensed it was different, even if they did not fully understand its significance at the time. And there are countless stories of rare coins sitting quietly in collections, drawers, or safety deposit boxes for decades before finally being authenticated and revealed to the world. And the 1980 penny existed during a time when few people imagined that modern coins could be worth serious money, making it easier for extraordinary pieces to slip through unnoticed. And another fascinating possibility tied to the $19 million valuation is the idea of a meal error, where mismatched dies are paired together, such as a Lincoln cent obverse with a reverse from another denomination or an incorrect year, creating a coin that should not exist according to official records. And while meal errors are exceedingly rare, they have occurred in U.S. coinage, and when they do, they become instant legends because they represent a fundamental breakdown in the minting process. And a 1980 cent mule would be one of the most important modern U.S. errors ever discovered, especially if it involved an unexpected pairing that shed new light on mint practices during that era. And beyond the technical aspects, the emotional and psychological factors driving such valuations cannot be ignored, because collectors are not purely rational actors, they are driven by passion, prestige, and the desire to own something extraordinary, and the idea that a penny from 1980, a year many people remember as part of their own lifetime, could be worth $19 million is inherently captivating. Because it collapses the distance between history and the present, reminding us that rarity and value are not confined to ancient artifacts, but can emerge from our own everyday experiences, and this sense of possibility fuels intense interest, media attention, and bidding wars when truly exceptional coins appear. And even rumors of such coins can drive renewed interest in searching rolls, collections, and inherited change, and it is important to emphasize that not every 1980 penny is valuable, and the vast majority are worth only face value, but the story here is not about what is common, it is about what is possible, and the $19 million figure represents the extreme upper boundary of what collectors might be willing to pay if a perfect storm of rarity, condition, historical significance, and authentication were to converge in a single coin, and as time passes, the chances of discovering such coins diminish as more pieces are damaged, lost, or destroyed, making any new discovery even more significant, and this ongoing search is what keeps the hobby alive, because every coin examined carries a tiny spark of hope, a chance that it might be something extraordinary. And the legend of the 1980 mint-marked 1 cent USA coin continues to grow as collectors, researchers, and enthusiasts debate its possibilities, analyze known errors, and imagine what might still be out there waiting to be found, and whether or not a $19 million example ever publicly surfaces. The story itself changes how people look at their change, encouraging curiosity, patience, and a deeper appreciation for the hidden complexity of something as simple as a penny. And in the end, The true power of this story lies not just in the potential money, but in the reminder that value is often hidden, that mistakes can become miracles, and that even the smallest objects can carry stories big enough to change lives, which is why the 1980 penny remains one of the most fascinating and emotionally charged topics in modern numismatics, a symbol of how the ordinary can become extraordinary under the right circumstances. Next, 2009 mint mark D1 cent birthplace USA coin, a penny that many people remember receiving in their change during an ordinary year, yet under extraordinarily rare circumstances and because of a unique combination of historical importance, minting pressure, design transitions, striking errors, and production anomalies. This modern Lincoln cent has been talked about in collector circles as having the potential to reach a staggering value of $12 million, a figure that sounds almost impossible for a coin produced in the 21st century, and yet when you truly understand what makes this coin different, why the year 2009 was unlike any other in modern U.S. coinage, and how errors and mistakes during that historic program could create once-in-a-lifetime treasures, the idea of a $12 million penny begins to feel less like fantasy and more like a rare but real possibility. Because the 2009 Lincoln Cent series was not just another annual issue, it was a historic Ford-designed program created to commemorate the bicentennial of Abraham Lincoln's birth and the 100th anniversary of the Lincoln Cent itself, and this meant that the United States Mint was operating under extraordinary pressure to redesign, retool, and produce massive quantities of new designs in a single year, something it had not done for the cent in generations. And the very first design in that series, known as the birthplace design, depicting a log cabin representing Lincoln's humble beginnings in Kentucky, carries a symbolic weight that already sets it apart from ordinary pennies, and when symbolism meets scarcity, errors, and collector demand, value can skyrocket, especially when the coin in question comes from the Denver Mint, which had its own production challenges and quirks during this period. And to understand why a 2009 birthplace cent could be associated with a $12 million valuation, we must first understand the unprecedented circumstances surrounding its production, because in 2009 the United States was in the middle of a major economic crisis, demand for coins fluctuated wildly, budgets were tight, and the mint was forced to balance historical celebration with cost efficiency, all while producing 4 separate reverse designs for the same denomination in a single year, and this created a perfect storm for mistakes. Because every new design requires new dies, new hubs, adjustments to striking pressure, and extensive testing, and every change increases the risk of something going wrong, and when something does go wrong and escapes quality control, the result can be a coin so rare that it becomes legendary. And one of the most important factors behind the potential $12 million value is the possibility of extreme die errors unique to the birthplace design, because unlike the Lincoln Memorial reverse used for decades, the log cabin design introduced entirely new elements, new textures, and new stress points on the die, particularly in the fine lines of the logs, the roof, and the surrounding details, and dies that are not perfectly prepared or that are pushed too hard can crack, chip, clash, or even partially fail, producing coins with dramatic visual distortions that are instantly recognizable and incredibly rare. And while minor die cracks exist on many coins, an extreme shattered die or retained cut on a 2009 birthplace cent, especially one that dramatically alters the cabin or lettering, could create a one-of-a-kind specimen that collectors would fight fiercely to own. And beyond die failures, one of the most talked about possibilities in this series involves double die errors, because the creation of 4 new designs in a single year meant extensive hubbing activity, and every hubbing process carries the risk of misalignment, and if a die received a second misaligned impression, the resulting doubled die could produce strong, raised, clearly separated doubling on the lettering, date, mint mark, or even on the intricate details of the log cabin itself, and a dramatic doubled die on the birthplace design would be especially significant because of the complexity of the image, and if such doubling were bold enough to be seen without magnification, it would instantly become one of the most famous doubled dies of the modern era, and if only 1 or 2 examples were known, the value could climb rapidly as collectors and investors compete for ownership, and This competition is amplified by the fact that 2009 coins are modern enough that many people assume they are common and unimportant, allowing rare errors to slip through unnoticed for years, increasing the shock and excitement when one is finally discovered. And another critical factor in the $12 million discussion is the issue of composition and planchet errors. Because 2009 cents were struck on copper-plated zinc planchets, and during periods of high production and multiple design changes, planchet mix-ups become more likely, and if a birthplace cent were struck on an incorrect planchet, such as one intended for another denomination, a foreign coin, or an experimental blank, the resulting coin would immediately stand out in weight, thickness, and sound, and such wrong planchet errors are among the most valuable in numismatics, especially when they involve modern coins where quality control is assumed to be tight, because their existence challenges that assumption and proves that even in the modern era, extraordinary mistakes can happen, and if the planchet involved were made of an unusual or experimental metal, the coin would take on an entirely new level of importance, becoming not just an error, but a piece of undocumented mint history. And history has shown that experimental or off-metal coins that escape into circulation can command staggering prices because they represent physical evidence of behind-the-scenes experimentation that was never meant to be public, and when tied to a historically significant program like the 2009 Lincoln Bicentennial Series, that evidence becomes even more valuable. And there is also the intriguing possibility of missing or incorrect mint marks, because while the Denver Mint normally applied the D mint mark consistently, errors can occur, and a 2009 D birthplace cent with a missing, malformed, or doubled mint mark combined with other major errors could become an ultra-rare variety. And while mint mark errors alone may not reach multi-million-dollar values, when combined with doubled dies, wrong planchets, or dramatic die failures, they contribute to the perfect storm that creates legendary coins. And this leads us to the concept of multiple error coins once again, because the real drivers of extreme value are coins that exhibit more than one major error at the same time. Since the odds of multiple independent mistakes occurring on the same coin without it being caught and rejected are incredibly small. And if a 2009 D birthplace cent were discovered with a combination of a doubled die, a major die break, and a wrong planchet, the coin would almost certainly be unique, and uniqueness is the ultimate currency in the world of elite collecting, because when only one example exists, price is determined not by guides or comparisons, but by how badly someone wants to own it. And the $12 million valuation represents a theoretical ceiling based on what collectors have paid for other unique modern U.S. coins that combine rarity, historical significance, and exceptional visual impact, and condition plays a crucial role here as well, because for a coin to approach such a value, it would need to be preserved in outstanding condition, ideally mint state with strong original luster, sharp details, and minimal handling. And while it may seem unlikely that such a rare error could survive in pristine condition, it is important to remember that many 2009 cents were saved by the public simply because of the bicentennial designs, increasing the odds that an extraordinary error could have been preserved from the start, tucked away in collections, rolls, or albums without ever entering heavy circulation. And this is one of the unique aspects of modern commemorative circulating coinage, because public awareness can sometimes work in favor of preservation, allowing rare pieces to survive in better condition than older coins ever could. And another fascinating possibility connected to the $12 million discussion is the idea of a mule error involving the birthplace reverse, where the reverse die is paired with an incorrect obverse or a mismatched design intended for another phase of the 2009 series, creating a coin that officially should not exist. And while mule errors are extremely rare, they have occurred in U.S. coinage, and when they do, they become instant legends, because they reveal fundamental breakdowns in the minting process. And a 2009 mule involving the birthplace design would be especially significant because of the multiple reverse designs in use that year, increasing the complexity of die handling and the potential for mistakes. And beyond the technical aspects, the emotional and psychological factors driving interest in this coin cannot be ignored, because the idea that a penny from 2009, a year many people remember vividly, could be worth $12 million is deeply compelling. It collapses the distance between everyday life and extraordinary wealth, and it reinforces the idea that history is not just something locked away in museums, but something that passes through our hands every day, and this sense of possibility fuels intense interest, media attention, and renewed enthusiasm for coin searching, roll hunting, and collecting, and even rumors of such coins can inspire people to look more closely at their change, to learn about mint marks, errors, and varieties, and to develop a deeper appreciation for the complexity of something as seemingly simple as a penny. And it is important to say clearly that not every 2009 birthplace cent is valuable, and the vast majority are worth only face value or a small premium. But the story here is about extremes, about what happens when history, error, rarity, and human fascination collide. And the $12 million figure represents the upper edge of what could be possible if a truly extraordinary example were discovered, authenticated, and offered to the market. And as time goes on, the chances of discovering such coins may decrease as collections are dispersed, coins are damaged, or errors remain hidden, making any future discovery even more dramatic. And this ongoing search is what keeps numismatics alive and exciting, because every coin carries the potential to surprise us, to challenge our assumptions, and to remind us that value is not always obvious. And in the end, the story of the 2009 Mint Mark D1 cent birthplace USA coin is not just about money, it is about history, about human error, about commemoration, and about the enduring belief that even in the modern world, with all its technology and oversight, extraordinary mistakes can still happen, and when they do, they can transform an ordinary penny into a life-changing treasure, which is why this coin continues to captivate collectors, storytellers, and dreamers alike, standing as a powerful symbol of how the smallest pieces of history can sometimes carry the biggest possibilities. Next, 1963 No Mint Mark 1 cent USA coin, a penny that once passed quietly through countless hands during a turbulent decade, yet under extraordinarily rare circumstances and because of a remarkable convergence of minting errors, historical tension, material uncertainty, and human oversight. This seemingly ordinary Lincoln cent has been spoken of in elite collecting circles as having the potential to reach an astonishing value of $29 million, a number so staggering that it almost feels unreal for a coin so small. Yet when we peel back the layers of history surrounding the year 1963, examine the intense pressures inside the Philadelphia Mint, and explore the rare and dramatic mistakes that could have occurred during that time, the idea of a $29 million penny begins to transform from fantasy into a powerful possibility rooted in history, rarity, and human error. Because 1963 was not just another year in American coinage, it was a year of profound national change, political uncertainty, and economic strain, a year when demand for coinage surged, when the mint was under relentless pressure to strike billions of coins, and when copper prices, public hoarding fears, and production speed collided in ways that pushed minting systems to their limits. And it is precisely under such extreme conditions that the most extraordinary errors are born. Because when speed becomes essential and perfection becomes secondary, the smallest mistake can slip through unnoticed and quietly enter circulation, carrying with it the seeds of future legend. And the 1963 No Mint Mark penny, produced at the Philadelphia Mint as was tradition at the time, sits at a fascinating crossroads in U.S. numismatic history, because it was struck during the final years before the great composition changes of the 1980s. Yet during a period when the mint was already wrestling with rising copper costs, experimental thinking, and unprecedented public scrutiny, and while officially the 1963 Lincoln cent was struck in the standard bronze composition of copper, tin, and zinc, history has repeatedly shown that what is official and what actually happened inside the mint are not always perfectly aligned, and that gap between intention and reality is where the possibility of a $29 million coin is born. Because one of the most powerful factors driving such a valuation is the potential existence of an off-metal or wrong planchet error from this year, an error so rare and so historically significant that it would instantly become one of the most important modern-era U.S. coins ever discovered. And during the early 1960s, the U.S. Mint was striking not only domestic coinage but also producing coins for foreign governments, handling planchets of different metals, sizes, and compositions within the same facilities. And whenever different blanks share the same production environment, the risk of accidental mixing increases, and if even a single 1963 penny were struck on a foreign planchet, an experimental alloy, or a leftover blank from another denomination, the resulting coin would immediately stand out in weight, color, thickness, and acoustic signature, and such a discovery would not merely represent an error, but a physical breach of the mint's historical record. A tangible artifact proving that something unexpected escaped into public hands, and collectors place enormous value on such evidence, especially when it comes from a year as historically significant as 1963, and if that wrong planchet were made of a highly unusual or undocumented metal, the coin would take on near mythical status, because it would suggest experimentation or logistical breakdowns that were never meant to be seen, and in numismatics, secrets revealed through metal are among the most valuable stories of all, and beyond off-metal strikes. One of the most compelling possibilities surrounding the 1963 no-mint mark penny is the idea of an extreme double die error, far beyond the minor doubling seen on many coins, because true double dies occur during the creation of the die itself, when the hub impresses the design more than once in a misaligned manner, and the early 1960s were a period when hubbing technology was less refined than it would later become, increasing the likelihood of such errors. And if a 1963 double-die penny were discovered with dramatic, bold, clearly separated doubling on the date, the word Liberty, Indiana God We Trust, or even Lincoln's facial features, the coin would instantly be elevated into elite status, and if that doubling were strong enough to be visible without magnification, the coin would become instantly recognizable and unforgettable, a visual representation of human error frozen in copper, and if only one or two examples were known, collectors would compete fiercely for ownership, driving the price upward not just because of rarity, but because of the emotional impact such a coin creates. And this emotional component is critical in understanding how valuations reach into the tens of millions, because at the highest levels of collecting, logic gives way to desire, prestige, and the hunger to own something truly unique, and uniqueness is the ultimate currency in numismatics. And another major contributor to the $29 million valuation is the possibility of catastrophic die failures during the striking process, because the Philadelphia Mint in 1963 was pushing its dies hard to meet demand, often using them well past their optimal lifespan, and this increases the risk of die cracks, retained cuds, shattered dies, and dramatic die breaks, where large portions of the die fracture or break away, leaving raised, distorted areas on the struck coins, sometimes obliterating parts of the design or creating surreal, almost abstract shapes, and while minor die cracks are relatively common, truly extreme examples are rare, and when such an error is severe enough to dramatically alter the appearance of the coin, it becomes instantly collectible, and when combined with other errors, such as doubling or planchet anomalies, it becomes exponentially rarer, and this leads us to the concept of multiple error coins, which are among the most valuable objects in all of numismatics. Because the probability of multiple independent mistakes occurring on the same coin without it being caught by quality control is extraordinarily small, and if a 1963 no-mint mark penny were discovered exhibiting a combination of a wrong planchet, an extreme double die, and a major die break, the coin would almost certainly be unique, and uniqueness removes the ceiling on value, because when there is only one known example, price is determined not by guides or averages, but by how much someone is willing to pay to secure that singular piece of history, and history shows us that when such coins come to market, especially those tied to iconic designs like the Lincoln cent, bidding can reach levels that shock even seasoned experts, and condition plays an equally critical role in this story, because for a coin to approach a valuation of $29 million, it would need to be preserved in exceptional condition, ideally mint state with strong original luster, sharp details, and minimal post-mint handling. And while it may seem unlikely that such a rare error could survive in pristine condition for decades, it is important to remember that many coins are pulled from circulation early by observant individuals, sometimes simply because they look strange or different, and set aside without fully understanding their significance, and these quiet acts of curiosity can preserve extraordinary pieces for future generations. And the 1963 penny existed at a time when few people imagined modern coins could ever be worth serious money, making it easier for rare pieces to be tucked away unnoticed. And another fascinating possibility associated with the $29 million discussion is the idea of transitional errors, because while the official composition of the cent did not change until later decades, the mint was already deeply aware of rising copper prices and the need to explore alternatives. And while official experimental cents are more commonly associated with later years, history has taught us that experimentation often begins earlier than public records suggest. And if a 1963 penny were struck on an experimental or test planchet never intended for circulation, its existence would rewrite part of the narrative of U.S. coinage history, and collectors and institutions would place enormous value on such a discovery, because it would represent a missing piece of the historical puzzle. And beyond the technical errors, the historical context of 1963 adds an emotional and symbolic weight that cannot be ignored. Because this was a year marked by profound national trauma and transformation, forever associated with the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. And while the Lincoln cent itself is not directly tied to that event, coins from this period carry a unique resonance, representing a nation in transition. And when historical emotion intersects with rarity and error, value is often amplified, because collectors are not just buying metal. They are buying a tangible connection to a moment in time, and the idea that a penny from such a pivotal year could be worth $29 million captures the imagination in a way few other stories can, because it reminds us that history does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it whispers through everyday objects, and this psychological impact plays a significant role in driving interest and valuation. And it is important to be clear that not every 1963 no-mint mark penny is valuable, and the vast majority are worth only a small premium or face value. But the story here is not about the ordinary, it is about the extraordinary, about the rare convergence of error, preservation, and historical significance that creates legendary coins. And the $29 million figure represents the extreme upper boundary of what could be possible if a truly unique, fully authenticated, and visually dramatic example were discovered and offered to the market. And as time passes, the likelihood of discovering such coins diminishes as pieces are damaged, lost, or melted, making any future discovery even more remarkable. And this ongoing search is what keeps collectors searching rolls, examining old jars, and studying coins under magnification, because every penny carries the potential, however small, to be something more. And in the end, the story of the 1963 no-mint mark 1 cent USA coin is not just a story about money, it is a story about human error, historical pressure, hidden experimentation, and the extraordinary value that can emerge from the most humble beginnings. And it stands as a powerful reminder that even a single cent, overlooked and underestimated, can carry a story and a potential value big enough to change a life forever. Next, 1987 no-mint mark 1 cent USA coin, a penny that most people remember as completely ordinary, lightweight, and forgettable, yet under extraordinarily rare circumstances and because of a powerful combination of minting errors, transitional confusion, production pressure, and hidden anomalies. This humble Lincoln cent has been discussed in elite collector circles as having the potential to reach an astonishing value of $18 million, a figure that feels almost impossible for a modern penny until you truly understand why the late 1980s represent a silent danger zone in U.S. coin production, a period when the mint appeared stable on the surface but was actually operating under intense internal pressure, aging machinery, material limitations, and cost-cutting measures that quietly increased the risk of monumental mistakes. And it is precisely during such periods of apparent normalcy that the most shocking errors often slip through unnoticed, because when everyone assumes everything is under control, vigilance drops, and human error finds its opening. And to understand the legend of the 1987 no-mint mark penny, we must first remember that this coin was struck at the Philadelphia Mint, which traditionally did not use a mint mark on cents, meaning billions of pennies left the facility looking identical at first glance, blending seamlessly into everyday circulation. And this overwhelming sameness is exactly what makes rare anomalies so dangerous, and so valuable, because when a coin looks normal, it is far less likely to be questioned, weighed, tested, or examined closely, allowing extraordinary errors to pass silently through commerce and into history. And the year 1987 sits in a very specific and important place in Lincoln cent history, because by this time the transition from copper to copper-plated zinc was fully implemented. Yet the long-term consequences of that change were still unfolding, including plating failures, bonding issues, planchet inconsistencies, and stress fractures that created new categories of errors never seen in earlier decades. And while many people associate valuable errors with dramatic transitional years like 1982 or famous anomalies like the 1943 copper cent, experienced collectors know that post-transition years like 1987 can be even more dangerous, because they combine new materials with aging production systems, creating subtle but catastrophic failure points that are easy to miss but incredibly rare when fully realized. And one of the most important theories behind the $18 million valuation is the possibility of a major off-metal or wrong planchet error involving a 1987 penny, because during the late 1980s the U.S. Mint was producing coins for multiple denominations and foreign governments, handling blanks of different sizes, thicknesses, and metals within the same facilities. And whenever multiple planchet types coexist, the risk of accidental mixing becomes real, and if even a single 1987 penny were struck on a planchet intended for another denomination, such as a dime, or a foreign coin made of a completely different alloy, the resulting coin would instantly defy expectations in weight, color, thickness, and acoustic signature, and such coins are among the most valuable errors in all of numismatics, especially when they come from a year that is assumed to be routine and unremarkable, because they prove that even in the modern era, the mint is not immune to fundamental breakdowns, and if the wrong planchet involved were itself rare or undocumented, the coin would become not just an error but a historical artifact, representing a breach in the official record, and collectors place extraordinary value on physical evidence that contradicts what is supposed to be impossible, and this is where valuations can climb into the multi-million-dollar range. Especially if the coin is unique, because uniqueness removes all limits on price. And another major contributor to the legend of the 1987 no-mint mark penny is the potential existence of extreme double-die errors from this year, because although hubbing technology had improved by the late 1980s, it was not immune to failure, and the sheer volume of dies required for cent production meant that mistakes could still occur during the hubbing process, and true doubled dies, unlike common machine doubling, are part of the die itself, producing raised, clearly separated doubling that is sharp and unmistakable. And if a 1987 double-die penny were discovered with bold doubling on the date, the word Liberty, Indiana God We Trust, or Lincoln's facial features, especially if multiple elements were affected simultaneously, it would instantly become one of the most important double dies of the zinc era. And if only one or two examples were known, competition among collectors would be fierce, because modern double dies with dramatic visual impact are incredibly rare and highly sought after, and when rarity meets recognizability, value accelerates rapidly, and beyond double dies, the zinc-based composition of the 1987 penny introduces another layer of error potential that did not exist in earlier copper cents, because copper-plated zinc planchets are fundamentally more fragile, and failures in the plating process can lead to exposed zinc cores, blistering, bubbling, splitting, or partial plating loss. And while minor plating defects are common, truly extreme examples where the plating fails catastrophically during striking can produce coins with surreal appearances, missing copper layers, distorted surfaces, or dramatic textural differences. And if such a plating failure were combined with another major error, such as a double die or off-center strike, the result would be a multiple error coin of extraordinary rarity. And multiple error coins are among the most valuable objects in numismatics because the probability of two or more independent mistakes occurring on the same coin without it being caught by quality control is extraordinarily small, and if a 1987 no-mint mark penny were discovered exhibiting a wrong planchet, extreme plating failure, and double die characteristics, the coin would almost certainly be unique, And uniqueness is the single most powerful force in high-end collecting, because when only one example exists, price becomes a function of desire rather than reference. And this is how valuations like $18 million become theoretically possible, because at that level, the buyer is not purchasing a penny, but securing exclusive ownership of a historical anomaly that cannot be replicated. And another important factor in the valuation discussion is the possibility of catastrophic die failures during the striking process, because the Philadelphia Mint in the late 1980s was still using some aging equipment, and dies were often pushed hard to maximize efficiency and reduce costs, increasing the risk of die cracks, retained cuds, shattered dies, and major die breaks. And while small die cracks are common, truly dramatic failures where large portions of the die break away and remain in place long enough to strike coins are rare and visually stunning, creating raised blobs of metal, missing letters, distorted portraits, or abstract shapes that immediately capture attention, and a severe die failure on a 1987 penny, especially one that dramatically alters Lincoln's portrait or inscriptions, would be a centerpiece of modern era collecting, and when combined with other anomalies, its rarity would increase exponentially, and condition plays a critical role in determining whether such a coin could approach $18 million, because at the highest levels of the market, rarity alone is not enough. The coin must also be well preserved, visually striking, and free from post-mint damage, ideally retaining strong original luster and sharp details. And while it may seem unlikely that such a rare era could survive decades without damage, history shows that extraordinary coins are often recognized early, sometimes simply because they look strange or wrong, and set aside by curious individuals who sense their importance even if they do not fully understand it. And the late 1980s were a time when many people casually saved coins without much thought, increasing the chance that rare errors were preserved rather than spent or destroyed. And another intriguing possibility associated with the 1987 Mint mark penny is the idea of meal errors, where mismatched dies are paired together, creating a coin that should not exist according to official records. And while meal errors are extremely rare in modern U.S. coinage, they have occurred, and when they do, they become instant legends, because they represent a fundamental breakdown in the minting process. And a mule involving a 1987 cent would be especially shocking because of the assumed stability of the era, and such a discovery would instantly attract global attention from collectors, historians, and institutions, driving value to extraordinary heights. And beyond the technical aspects, the emotional power of the 1987 penny story cannot be ignored, because it challenges the belief that only old coins are valuable, reminding us that rarity is not a function of age alone but of circumstance, error, and survival. And collectors are deeply drawn to modern rarities because they collapse the distance between history and the present, making it feel possible that something extraordinary could still be found today, in a jar, a drawer, or an inherited collection. And this emotional connection fuels intense interest, media attention, and bidding wars when truly exceptional modern coins appear. And it is important to clearly state that the vast majority of 1987 no-mint mark pennies are completely ordinary zinc cents worth only face value. And the story here is not about what is common, but about what is possible. And the $18 million figure represents the extreme upper boundary of value that could be reached if a truly unique, fully authenticated, visually dramatic, and historically significant example were discovered and offered to the market. And as time passes, the chances of finding such coins decrease as zinc cents corrode, are damaged, or are discarded, making any surviving extraordinary example even more precious. And this ongoing search is what keeps collectors examining coins closely, weighing them, listening to their sound, and questioning assumptions, because every penny carries a whisper of possibility. And in the end, the story of the 1987 no-mint mark 1 cent USA coin is not just about money, it is about hidden mistakes, modern myths, human oversight, and the extraordinary value that can emerge when something that should be ordinary turns out to be anything but, standing as a powerful reminder that even in the modern age, with all its technology and control, history can still hide miracles in plain sight, and that a single overlooked penny can still carry the power to change a life forever. Next, 1983 no-mint mark 1 cent USA coin, a penny that most people remember as nothing special, a lightweight copper-colored coin from the early 1980s, yet under extraordinarily rare circumstances and because of a perfect storm of historical transition, minting errors, material confusion, and human oversight. This seemingly insignificant coin has been discussed in high-level collecting circles as having the potential to reach an astonishing value of $18 million, a number that feels almost impossible for a modern penny until you truly understand why the year 1983 is one of the most critical and dangerous years in the entire history of the Lincoln cent, because 1983 sits directly at the heart of one of the most dramatic composition changes ever made to a U.S. coin, a change so significant that it permanently altered the physical nature of the penny itself. And whenever massive changes happen inside the U.S. Mint, mistakes do not just become possible, they become inevitable, and it is within those mistakes that legendary coins are born, because to understand the mystery of the 1983 no-mint mark penny, we must remember that until 1982, Lincoln cents were primarily made of copper, but in 1982 the mint officially transitioned to copper-plated zinc planchets to reduce costs, creating a chaotic overlap period where both copper and zinc cents were being produced, tested, and distributed at the same time, and this transition did not end cleanly on December 31, 1982, because mints are not light switches, they are complex industrial environments filled with leftover materials, dies, planchets, and partially completed production runs, and by 1983, the official story was that all Lincoln cents were zinc-based, yet history has repeatedly proven that official records do not always capture every anomaly. And this is where the possibility of an $18 million coin emerges, because one of the most powerful theories surrounding the 1983 no-mint mark penny is the existence, or potential existence, of a copper 1983 cent struck accidentally on leftover bronze planchets from 1982, and this is not a fantasy, because similar transitional errors are already known and documented, such as the famous 1983 copper cent discoveries that have sparked intense debate, testing, and authentication battles. And if a genuine 1983 copper penny exists, especially one from the Philadelphia Mint with no mint mark, it would instantly become one of the most important era coins in modern U.S. history because it would represent a direct contradiction of official mint production, a physical artifact proving that copper planchets survived into a year when they should not have existed, and when such contradictions are proven with metal and science, collectors, museums, and institutions take notice, and values can reach unimaginable levels. Especially if the coin is unique, or nearly unique, and the $18 million valuation is rooted deeply in this possibility, because transitional metal errors are among the most valuable errors ever produced, as seen with coins like the 1943 copper cent and the 1944 steel cent, which have sold for enormous sums, and the idea of a 1983 copper cent carries similar emotional and historical weight, because it represents the end of an era. The final ghost of copper lingering where it should not exist, and if such a coin were discovered in pristine mint state condition, fully authenticated by multiple independent laboratories using metallurgical analysis, its value would not just be based on rarity, but on its power to rewrite a chapter of numismatic history, and beyond transitional metal errors, the 1983 no-mint mark penny is also a fertile ground for dramatic minting mistakes caused by the immense pressure the Philadelphia Mint was under during this period. Because the early 1980s were marked by inflation, economic uncertainty, and public distrust of coinage, leading to hoarding, shortages, and an urgent demand for new coins, and to meet this demand, the Mint pushed its machinery hard, often running dies beyond their intended lifespan, increasing the likelihood of die cracks, die clashes, misalignments, and catastrophic die failures, and while small die cracks are common, truly extreme examples where large portions of the die break away, known as retained cuds or shattered dies, are rare and visually dramatic, creating raised blobs, missing letters, distorted portraits, or surreal shapes that instantly draw attention, and a severe die failure on a 1983 penny, especially one that dramatically alters Lincoln's portrait or the inscriptions, could become a centerpiece of modern era collecting, and when such an error is combined with another major anomaly, such as a transitional metal composition, the result becomes exponentially rarer. And this brings us to the concept of multiple error coins, which are among the most valuable objects in all of numismatics, because the odds of multiple independent mistakes occurring on the same coin without it being caught by quality control are extraordinarily small, and if a 1983 no-mint mark penny were discovered exhibiting a copper composition, a double die, and a major die break, the coin would almost certainly be unique, and uniqueness is the single most powerful driver of value at the highest levels of collecting. Because when only one example exists, price becomes a matter of desire rather than comparison, and this is where numbers like $18 million become possible, because at that level, the buyer is not purchasing a penny, but securing exclusive ownership of a historical anomaly that no one else can possess. And another major factor in the valuation discussion is the possibility of extreme double die errors in 1983, because the creation of dies during a transitional period often involves rushed hubbing, adjustments, and increased human involvement, all of which increase the risk of misalignment during the hubbing process. And true double dies are fundamentally different from common machine doubling, because they are part of the die itself, producing raised, clearly separated doubling that is sharp and unmistakable. And if a 1983 double die penny were discovered with bold doubling on the date, the word Liberty, Indiana God We Trust, or Lincoln's features, it would instantly become one of the most important double dies of the zinc era, and if that doubling were dramatic enough to be visible to the naked eye, the coin would become iconic, instantly recognizable, and highly desirable, especially if only one or two examples were known, and this desirability is amplified by the psychological impact of a modern coin achieving legendary status, because collectors are deeply fascinated by the idea that modern technology and oversight can still produce monumental mistakes, reminding us that perfection is an illusion even in the most controlled environments. And beyond double dies and transitional metals, there is also the possibility of wrong planchet errors in 1983, because during this time, the mint was handling planchets for multiple denominations and foreign contracts, and whenever different blanks share production space, the risk of mix-ups increases. And if a 1983 penny were struck on a planchet intended for another denomination or a foreign coin, especially one made of an unusual metal or thickness, the resulting coin would immediately stand out in weight, color, and sound, and such errors are highly prized because they represent a breakdown in the mint's internal controls, and when tied to a historically sensitive year like 1983, they become even more valuable, and condition plays a critical role in determining whether such a coin could reach $18 million, because at the highest levels of the market, rarity alone is not enough. The coin must also be visually stunning, well preserved, and free from post-mint damage, ideally graded in high mint state with original luster intact. And while it may seem unlikely that such a rare error could survive untouched, history shows that extraordinary coins are often recognized early, set aside, and protected, sometimes by people who simply sensed something was different even if they did not fully understand why. And the early 1980s were a time when many people saved coins out of curiosity or fear of shortages, increasing the chances that rare errors were preserved rather than spent. And another intriguing possibility associated with the 1983 no-mint mark penny is the idea of mule errors, where mismatched dies are paired together, creating a coin that should not exist according to official records. And while mule errors are extremely rare, they have occurred in U.S. coinage. And a mule involving a 1983 cent would be especially significant because of the composition transition and increased complexity of production during this period, and such a discovery would instantly become a headline event in the numismatic world, commanding intense attention from collectors, investors, and historians alike. And beyond the technical details, the emotional power of the 1983 penny story cannot be ignored, because it represents the end of copper, the beginning of a new era, and a moment when economic reality forced a fundamental change in something as symbolic as the penny, and collectors are drawn to moments of transition because they represent change, tension, and uncertainty. And when a coin embodies that tension through an error or anomaly, it becomes more than metal, it becomes a symbol. And symbols carry enormous value in collecting culture, and this emotional resonance plays a significant role in driving valuations into the millions, because people are not just buying rarity, they are buying meaning, history, and exclusivity. And it is important to clearly state that the vast majority of 1983 no-mint mark pennies are ordinary zinc cents worth only face value, and the story here is not about what is common, but about what is possible. And the $18 million figure represents the extreme upper boundary of value that could be reached if a truly unique, fully authenticated, historically significant example were discovered and offered to the market, and as time passes, the chances of finding such coins decrease as zinc cents corrode, are damaged, or are discarded, making any surviving extraordinary example even more precious. And this ongoing search is what keeps collectors examining coins closely, weighing them, testing them, and questioning assumptions. Because every penny from 1983 carries a whisper of possibility, a reminder that history sometimes leaves behind ghosts, and in the end, the story of the 1983 no-mint mark 1 cent USA coin is not just about money, it is about transition, human error, hidden survival, and the extraordinary value that can emerge when something that should not exist does exist, standing quietly as proof that even in the modern world, miracles can be struck in metal, and that a single overlooked penny can still carry the power to change a life forever.